In 1990, WordPerfect Corporation employed more than 5,000 people in Orem, Utah. It controlled roughly 70% of the global word processing market. Its revenue exceeded $500 million a year, and its software shipped in 28 languages to 120 countries. Every copy left the factory with a cardboard keyboard template tucked inside the box, a narrow strip designed to sit above the function keys on an IBM PC. F7 to save and exit, Shift F7 to print, Alt F3 for reveal codes. For millions of American office workers, that strip of printed cardboard was the interface. Not a mouse, not a menu. A row of function keys and the muscle memory to use them. By 1998, the Orem offices were closed. 530 people were told not to come back. The software copyright that once read Orem, Utah, now listed Ottawa, Canada. The company that had been valued at $1.4 billion sold for $186 million, and the 14 buildings it had filled in a campus called Canyon Park sat mostly empty. The keyboard template, the one that taught a generation of Americans how to use a computer, was in a drawer somewhere, or a landfill, and nobody was looking for it. This is the story of how the most popular software in America disappeared in under 5 years, and why the people who built it never saw it coming. You're watching Tech District, where we take apart the companies that built the software Americans typed on every day, down to the code and the engineers who wrote it. If that's your kind of story, subscribe and hit like, because the rise here is just as strange as the fall. Alan Ashton was not a startup founder. He was a computer science professor at Brigham Young University, a man with a PhD from the University of Utah, and a grandson of David O. McKay, a president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In the late 1970s, he was teaching undergraduates about mainframes and mini-computers in a department that most of the business world had never heard of. He was quiet, methodical, and had spent years thinking about how text should behave on a screen. Bruce Bastian arrived at BYU to direct the Cougar Marching Band. He was a music student from Twin Falls, Idaho, with no background in computers and no obvious reason to build one of the most successful software companies in American history. Ashton saw something in him and convinced him to switch to computer science. Bastian became his graduate assistant, and the two of them began working on a problem that almost nobody in 1977 considered urgent. Ashton had written specifications for a new kind of word processor, not a line editor, which forced users to work on one line of text at a time, not a screen editor bolted onto a mainframe terminal. A program that treated a document as a continuous, scrollable stream of text, with formatting commands hidden behind function keys, and a display that showed something close to what the printed page would look like. In 1977, this was not a product category. The IBM PC did not exist. Word processing meant a dedicated Wang machine the size of a filing cabinet, or a dumb terminal connected to a time-sharing system. There was no market for what they were about to build, because the machine it would run on had not been invented yet. What existed was a contract. In 1979, a company called Airing Research hired Ashton and Bastian to write a word processing program for the city of Orem's Data General mini-computer. The two men wrote the software, delivered it, and negotiated a clause that would change their lives. The city of Orem let them keep the commercial rights to the code. It was a small concession at the time, a municipal government handing off the resale rights to academic software written for a mini-computer. That concession would eventually cost Orem taxpayers millions in lost revenue and seed a billion-dollar industry in the process. In September 1979, Ashton and Bastian incorporated as Satellite Software International with a third partner named Don Owens. By March 1980, they shipped their product, SSIWP, for Data General mini-computers. The price was $5,500 per copy. The production cost was $25 per boxed unit. There were no outside investors and no venture capital. A man named W.E. Pete Peterson joined in October 1980 as a part-time office manager, earning $5 an hour. Ashton and Bastian each held 49.5% of the company. Peterson held less than 1%. By the end of 1980, Satellite Software International had 16 employees. Revenue for 1981 reached $850,000. In January 1983, Don Owens was bought out for $139,000 after disagreements about the company's direction. Within 5 years, his share of the company would have been worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He sold it for the price of a modest house. The day after Thanksgiving in 1982, WordPerfect 2.0 for the IBM PC shipped. First-year sales hit $1 million. The product was written entirely in x86 assembly language, because at the time, there were no C compilers available for the IBM PC that could produce fast enough code. Every instruction in the program talked directly to the processor. This made WordPerfect fast, precise, and compact. It also meant that every line of code was married to Intel's architecture, and moving the software to a different platform would mean rewriting it from scratch. In 1983, revenue reached $3.5 million. WordPerfect held roughly 1% of the word processing market. The dominant player was WordStar, and nobody in the industry took the Utah company seriously. WordPerfect 4.0 arrived in November 1984. Then, version 4.2 in 1986, adding automatic paragraph numbering, footnotes, and endnotes, and a printer driver editor that let users configure any printer on the market. This was not a small feature. In the DOS era, every application managed its own printing. If your word processor did not include a driver for your printer, you could not print. WordPerfect supported hundreds of printers. Microsoft Word supported a fraction. By 1986, WordPerfect had captured nearly a third of the IBM-compatible word processing market. Revenue hit $52 million. The workforce had grown to 350 employees, 100 of them in customer support, and 60% of those sales came from word-of-mouth referrals. Not advertising, not bundling deals. People told other people. The customer support line was an accident that became a weapon. WordPerfect published 2 phone numbers, a toll-free sales line and a toll support line. Customers discovered they could call the sales line and receive free technical help. Rather than shutting it down, management recognized the promotional value and kept it running. By 1986, the company was averaging 8,000 toll-free support calls per week. The support technicians did not just answer questions. They gathered bug reports, feature requests, and real-world usage data that fed directly back into development. No other software company in America was doing this, and the loyalty it built was worth more than any advertising budget. In 1987, WordPerfect became the most popular PC software in America. Revenue doubled to over $100 million. The company renamed itself from Satellite Software International to WordPerfect Corporation in 1985, and by 1987, the product was the name, and the name was the market. What turned WordPerfect from a contender into a near monopoly was a combination of 3 things, and each one was built for a world that was about to end. First, the printer drivers, hundreds of them, covering nearly every printer sold in America, each one hand-configured by WordPerfect's engineering team. In a world where every application had to talk to its own printers, this was an unbeatable advantage. Second, the support line. Thousands of calls a week, answered for free, by technicians who understood the product, because many of them were also its testers. The most effective sales force in the software industry was not a sales force at all. Third, reveal codes. Press Alt F3 on any document, and the screen split in half. The top half showed your text as you had typed it. The bottom half showed every formatting code embedded in the document, rendered in a way that looked remarkably like the HTML that would appear on the internet a decade later. You could see exactly where a bold tag started and stopped. You could see why your margins were wrong, why a paragraph refused to indent, why a font change bled into the next page. You could delete a single code and watch the problem vanish. You could see exactly what the computer was doing with your words, and you could fix it at the level of the machine. Lawyers loved it because they needed to know precisely what was inside a legal brief before they filed it with a court. A misplaced formatting code in a filing could change the meaning of an indented clause or scramble a numbered list of charges. Government agencies loved it because formatting errors in federal documents could delay entire proceedings. Anyone who had ever fought with a word processor and lost. Anyone who had ever watched their document rearrange itself for no visible reason loved reveal codes because it removed the mystery. No other word processor offered anything like it. Microsoft Word, to this day, has never shipped an equivalent. Every one of these advantages, the assembly code, the printer drivers, the function key interface, was built for DOS. And DOS, though nobody in Orem seemed to believe it yet, was about to disappear. In May 1988, WordPerfect 5.0 launched. It shipped with installation bugs. The support calls came in waves, and then the waves became a flood. WordPerfect generated so many toll-free calls to its Orem offices that it saturated AT&T's entire 1-800-line capacity for the state of Utah. Delta Airlines' reservation system went dark. American Express customer service calls to Utah stopped connecting. One software company in a single office park in Orem, Utah, accidentally brought down the toll-free telephone infrastructure of an entire state. The revenue that year grew 75% anyway. By 1988, sales reached $196 million. By 1990, they exceeded $500 million. The headcount swelled to 4,000 employees. 7 million people worldwide were using WordPerfect. The software ran in 28 languages. 55 international affiliates served 120 countries. Bruce Bastian's personal net worth climbed to $840 million. He made the Forbes 400 list of the wealthiest Americans. Alan Ashton made it too. Then, in May 1990, Microsoft shipped Windows 3.0. 3 million copies sold in the first year. The personal computer was leaving DOS behind. Every application would need to be rewritten for a graphical interface with a mouse, pull-down menus, and a built-in printer subsystem that made individual printer drivers unnecessary. WordPerfect Corporation had 0 experienced Windows developers on its payroll. The product that defined the company's peak was WordPerfect 5.1 for DOS, released in November 1989. It ran on 128 kilobytes of memory. It booted to a blue screen with white text, and the screen was almost entirely empty, stripped of the toolbars and ribbons and icons that would later define every piece of software. Just a blinking cursor and a status bar at the bottom, showing your line number, your position, and your file name. The keyboard template, that strip of cardboard in the box, was your guide. You memorized the function keys the way you memorized a phone number. F7 to save. Shift F7 to print. Control F5 to switch fonts. Alt F3 to see inside your document. WordPerfect 5.1 added pull-down menus for the first time, but the devoted users ignored them. They worked the function keys. The template was their instrument, and they played it without looking down. Tables arrived in this version. Print Preview showed you the page before you wasted the paper. The macro language, Perfect Script, let power users automate entire document workflows, from mail merges to formatted court filings, without touching a mouse. Underneath all of it was the code. Written in x86 assembly, every instruction optimized for the Intel processor. Every byte accounted for. The software ran fast on hardware that would choke on Microsoft Word. It printed to printers that Word could not recognize. It formatted documents with a precision that Word could not match. In 1990, WordPerfect was not just popular, it was, by every measure that mattered to the people who used it, the best word processor ever written. The company's culture matched its product. No outside debt, no venture capital, no board of directors telling the founders what to ship. Late-night pizzas delivered to programmers working overtime in the Orem offices. A corporate mission statement that read, "To develop, market, and support the finest software in the world." A guessing contest where employees predicted the annual revenue, and the winner took home $25,000. The company donated software to schools across Utah. It hired aggressively from BYU, pulling the best graduates in computer science before they could leave the state. Orem itself was becoming a company town. WordPerfect was the largest private employer in Utah County. The Canyon Park campus, 14 buildings spreading across a commercial park in the shadow of the Wasatch Mountains, filled with programmers and support technicians and translators who localized the software into 24 languages. When WordPerfect hired, the restaurants filled. When WordPerfect shipped a new version, the parking lots overflowed. The company that had started with 16 employees in 1980 now employed more than 5,000 people, and most of them lived within 20 minutes of the office. For a generation of Utah families, WordPerfect was not just a software company. It was a paycheck, a career, and a reason to stay. The seed of the decline was already in the ground, growing quietly under the success, and nobody at WordPerfect was watching it. The function key interface that users loved would not translate to a graphical operating system. The assembly language code that made the software fast could not be compiled for Windows. The printer driver library that gave WordPerfect its hardware advantage would become worthless the day Windows took over printer management. And the company, generating over $500 million a year in revenue, did not employ a single programmer with meaningful Windows development experience. In 1991, Microsoft shipped Microsoft Office. Word, Excel, and PowerPoint bundled together for $495. That was the same price as WordPerfect alone. WordPerfect had no spreadsheet. It had no presentation software. It had no answer. Pete Peterson, the man who had joined WordPerfect as a $5 an hour office manager and built its entire sales and support operation over 12 years, was fired in March 1992. He was the person who had coined the name WordPerfect. He was the person who had championed the toll-free support line. He described himself as the company's bad guy, the one who made the hard decisions while Ashton stayed in the lab and Bastian worked on the product. His offense, according to the accounts that followed, was that he opposed an aggressive push into Windows development and advocated a more conservative approach. After Peterson left, Ashton and Bastian expanded the payroll by 40% between 1992 and 1993. Revenue growth stalled. The man who had run the company's operations for a decade was gone, the costs were climbing, and the Windows version was still not ready. The problem was not just lateness, it was architecture. The company split its development effort between OS/2, IBM's operating system, and Windows, and it gave OS/2 the priority. In January 1990, Microsoft had offered WordPerfect early access to the Windows 3.0 beta. It was an invitation to lead the market into the graphical era. WordPerfect mishandled it. The company's engineers had spent a decade writing an assembly language for iOS, and the shift to a graphical interface with event-driven programming, memory management, and a completely different relationship to the hardware was not a matter of porting. It was a matter of starting over. The first Windows version, WordPerfect 5.1 for Windows, shipped in late 1991. It was slow. It was unstable. It installed from MS-DOS rather than from within Windows itself. InfoWorld called it less powerful than Word for Windows 2.0. Microsoft Word had already had the Windows market nearly to itself for more than a year, and it was not standing still. The problems ran deeper than lateness. WordPerfect's function key combinations, the ones that every user had memorized from the cardboard template, conflicted with Windows keyboard shortcuts. Control F4 in WordPerfect meant one thing. Control F4 in Windows meant another. The keyboard template, the talisman of the DOS era, was not just unnecessary in a world of mouse clicks and drop-down menus. It was actively confusing. The printer driver library that had given WordPerfect its advantage over every competitor became irrelevant overnight, because Windows handled its own printing. Every printer that worked with Windows worked with every Windows application. The moat was gone. And the assembly language codebase that had made the DOS version fast and lean made the Windows version nearly impossible to debug, maintain, or extend. You can read this decision two ways, and honest history requires both. One reading says WordPerfect was arrogant. that it believed DOS would last forever and ignored Windows until far too late. The other reading says the company was trapped by its own excellence. Its engineering decisions were rational for DOS. The assembly code was faster. The printer drivers were necessary. The function keys were efficient. But by the time Windows proved itself, the cost of rewriting hundreds of thousands of lines of assembly language into a higher-level language for a graphical operating system was more than any schedule could absorb. The strength became the cage. In 1993, WordPerfect tried to answer Microsoft Office by partnering with Borland International. WordPerfect plus Borland's Quattro Pro spreadsheet plus Paradox database equaled Borland Office, priced at $595. The market rejected it. The three programs had been written by different companies, and the integration was shallow. A middleware layer called Perfect Fit was supposed to tie them together, but version 2.0 of Perfect Fit did not ship until 1994, a year after the suite launched. Microsoft Office already felt like one product because Microsoft had written all three applications in-house. The Borland partnership felt like three strangers sharing a box. On March 22, 1994, Novell, the networking company headquartered in Provo, Utah, just minutes down the highway from WordPerfect's offices in Orem, announced it would acquire WordPerfect Corporation for $1.4 billion in a stock swap. On the same day, Novell bought Quattro Pro from Borland for an additional $145 million. Alan Ashton and Bruce Bastian each stood to receive approximately $700 million in Novell stock. The plan was to build an application suite that integrated with Novell's networking software, creating a platform that could challenge Microsoft across the entire corporate desktop. By the time the deal closed in June 1994, Novell's stock price had fallen. The actual value at completion came to approximately $855 million. The strategy failed almost immediately. Novell renamed WordPerfect's suite Perfect Office, tried to tie it to Novell networking features that most customers did not use, and assigned sales representatives who understood networking infrastructure to sell word processing software. The cultures collided. Network engineers were pitching to office managers. The product development stalled. The WordPerfect engineers, who had stayed through the acquisition, began to leave. Less than 2 years later, on January 31, 1996, Novell announced it would sell WordPerfect to Corel Corporation, a Canadian graphics software company best known for CorelDRAW. The price was $186 million. A product announced at $1.4 billion, sold for $186 million. Roughly 87% of the value destroyed in 22 months. Corel tried. It shipped WordPerfect 7 for Windows 95 in May 1996, but the initial release lacked the designed for Windows 95 logo and was incompatible with Windows NT. Enterprise customers, the law firms, and government agencies that had kept WordPerfect alive through the transition could not deploy it on their networks. The one audience that still cared was the one audience Corel could not reach. On June 25, 1998, Corel announced it would close its research and development division in Orem, Utah. 530 employees lost their jobs in a single announcement. That was 20% of Corel's worldwide workforce. WordPerfect development moved to Ottawa, Canada. The software copyright that had listed Orem, Utah, since 1980 was changed. That same week, iOmega, another Utah tech company just miles away, announced 400 layoffs of its own. In the space of 7 days, nearly 1,000 technology jobs vanished from Utah Valley. Corel reported an $8.3 million net loss for the quarter and $231.7 million in losses for the previous year. The Orem closure saved the company $33 million annually. The buildings that WordPerfect had built, all 14 of them in the Canyon Park campus, emptied out. They were sold to investors in 2000 and sat underused for years. In 2019, a real estate firm called the Mueller Company completed an $8.6 million renovation, adding a fitness center, a hammock garden, and barbecue spaces. The campus was remarketed for startups and entrepreneurs. It can hold 10,000 workers. The building that once housed the most popular word processor in America now rents desk space to companies that most of its former employees have never heard of. Alan Ashton took his share of the novel proceeds and built Thanksgiving Point in Lehi, Utah, a community destination with museums, botanical gardens, a golf course, and a theater. He said he wanted to give something back to the families in the area. He founded a venture capital firm called Ash Capital in 1999. He served as president of the Provo, Utah Temple. He is in his 80s now, living in Utah, largely out of public view. Bruce Bastian took a different path. After WordPerfect's sale, he came out as gay, left the LDS Church, and dedicated the second half of his life to philanthropy and LGBTQ advocacy. He created the B.W. Bastian Foundation in 1997. He donated $364,000 to fight Utah's same-sex marriage ban. He gave $1 million to oppose California's Proposition 8. He joined the board of the Human Rights Campaign and served for 22 years. He supported the Utah Symphony, Ballet West, and the University of Utah. His peak net worth had reached $840 million, and he spent decades giving it away. Bruce Bastian died on June 17, 2024, at the age of 76, from complications of pulmonary fibrosis in Palmdale, California. He was surrounded by his 4 sons, his husband Clint Ford, and his family. The man who came to BYU to direct a marching band, who switched to computer science because a professor saw something in him, who co-wrote a word processor in assembly language that became the most popular software in America, was gone. In November 2004, Novell filed an antitrust lawsuit against Microsoft, claiming that Microsoft had deliberately removed features from Windows 95 that WordPerfect depended on, crippling the product to benefit Microsoft Word. The suit sought more than $1 billion, Bill Gates testified. In July 2012, the case was dismissed. In 2014, the United States Supreme Court declined to hear the appeal. The legal system's final word on what killed WordPerfect was that nothing illegal had killed it. WordPerfect is still sold. You can buy WordPerfect Office from Coral, which now operates under the name Alludo. It costs $49.99 for the standalone word processor. It runs only on Windows, the last Mac version shipped in 1997 and was never updated. The market share, depending on who is counting, sits somewhere between 0.02% and 1.5%. Microsoft Word holds roughly 95%, but the software survives in the places where its strengths still matter. Law firms use it because reveal codes gives them formatting control that Microsoft Word has never matched. Government agencies use it because a brief filed in 2003 must open identically decades later, and WordPerfect's file format is more stable across versions than anything Microsoft has shipped. The French judiciary still trains clerks on it. The United States Department of Justice once selected it as its official word processor. The real legacy is not the software, it is the people. The engineers whom WordPerfect hired and trained, the ones whom Novell absorbed and Coral laid off, went on to found dozens of companies across Utah Valley. The region now calls itself Silicon Slopes, a corridor of technology companies stretching from Salt Lake City to Provo, and the workforce that built it traces directly back to the word processor that 2 men wrote in a university office in 1979. WordPerfect did not just make software. It trained the people who built Utah's technology industry. The company died, and the harvest grew under different names. If you ever sat down at that blue screen, if you pressed F7 to save and Shift F7 to print, if you kept that cardboard keyboard template above your function keys and learned to type without ever touching the mouse, then you already know the part of this story that no market share chart can measure. WordPerfect did not lose to a better word processor. It lost to a different operating system, and by the time it understood the difference, the war was already over. If you used WordPerfect, if you typed on that blue screen, or memorized those function keys, or worked in the Orem offices. Drop a comment below. Tell us the version, the year, and whether you still remember what F7 does. The people who use these programs know more about what was lost than the people who sold them. Subscribe to Tech District. We have the story of another American tech empire coming next, and you will not want to miss how it ends.